Yo man, you ever gonna do a video about the beef between 50 Cent and the Game? 50 Cent versus the Game. Do 50 versus Game, love that one. 50 and Game. Yo man, we need that 50 versus Game. Do 50 Cent versus the Game. Where's Game versus 50, bro? Hey bro, can you do who really won between 50 and Game? And finally, 50 Cent versus the Game.
Game on some yellow shit. NWA, nigga, you throws over, we're gonna take it right back. Nice and yellow on you. Look at that canary yellow. God damn, look at this shit. Yellow man. Gosh damn it.
What's up guys, it's your boy Quake, and as you can tell, this has been the most requested video for this video series. I've been messaged on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube comments, YouTube messages, and I didn't even know YouTube had messages, but I found messages of people asking about 50 Cent versus the Game. Where is that video? Well, finally, I'm here to deliver it. I'm glad you guys requested this. It just shows that you guys are interested in this video series. So no, I'm not annoyed by it. I really appreciate it because it shows interest, and I'm glad I can create a video series where people actually want to watch and they want the next episode. I was going to wait to do this video simply because this is a very long beef, something that needs a lot of detail, and I wanted to wait till the channel got bigger, but we just hit 60,000 subscribers, so I'm very thankful for that. So I was like, why not? People keep asking for it. I'm not going to be an asshole and wait it out. So I'm here to deliver the video you guys keep asking for, and man, this one is crazy. This beef is going to be done a little bit differently than the other videos. I'm going to split this beef into two parts because when I did 50 Cent versus Rick Ross, a lot of people were complaining about the video length. So what I decided to do is split it into two parts. I'm going to have a part 1 and a part 2. There's also going to be a few different things. I'm going to go over how 50 Cent and the Game actually met, and then what led up to how the beef even started. And the reason why I'm doing that is because this beef is different from normal beefs. Usually when artists have beef, it's going against a different team. This is a beef that started inside the team, meaning Game was part of G-Unit, Game was on 50's team, on Dr. Dre's team, and they somehow turned against each other. And this beef was an actual beef. This wasn't just something on wax. Someone died in this beef. A lot of lives got threatened. A lot of attempted murders happened. A lot of diss tracks back and forth, over 100 that are well documented. And a lot of lives just got ruined. Some people are in jail to this day because of this beef. Some people's careers aren't the same as what they used to be. So with that being said, we're going to first get into how 50 Cent and the Game met. Then we're going to talk about how the beef actually started. Then we're going to get into the major points in the beef. And then finally, towards the end, we're going to talk about who won the battle portion of the beef, which is the short-term portion of the beef, and then who won the war portion of the beef, which is the long-term portion of the beef, longevity, who survived after the beef, who prevailed. So with that being said, grab a drink, grab some popcorn. You guys already know what time it is.
Now play my shit! Man, listen, 50 Cent is fuck my big my face is fuck my big Tony Yale is fuck my big g-unot is fuck my big Olivia is fuck my big pop is fuck my big they whole crew is fuck my big if you a hater niggas fuck my big.
Same question that you asked me, Jimmy Iovine asked me. And I said, Jimmy, look, okay, I'll do the record with Game. Right after I die, you own the masters. And you could put the CD out. Like after I'm died, if I died, and you could take the masters and you could let them rap and I could put the CD out.
So let's get into how 50 Cent and the Game actually met. In late 2002, 50 Cent was signed to the Shady Aftermath imprint. It was a split deal between Eminem and Dr. Dre, but Eminem was the one who found 50 Cent and brought him to the label. It was not Dr. Dre's artist. So of course, Dr. Dre wanted to sign his own artist, someone who could bring back the West Coast, because the West Coast had slowly died down in terms of music. So he wanted someone he could sign that would bring back the West Coast and that would sign to his Aftermath imprint. And little did we know, behind the scenes in 2003, Dr. Dre was listening to a demo from a West Coast artist that he really liked. And 2 years later, the world would get to know him as the Game. Now in 2003, 50 Cent blew up with Get Rich or Die Trying. And then later on in 2003, the G-Unit debut album Beg for Mercy dropped. All in that year, Dr. Dre was working with the game, trying to develop his song structure. He was having a hard time writing hooks. The game couldn't develop hooks at all. He just could spit a bunch of bars, and Dr. Dre was trying to get him into an artist that could write songs and song structure. Dr. Dre ended up being really frustrated with the game because the whole 2003 year went and they didn't get anywhere with the game. They couldn't develop any buzz for him. Game went on to do some tracks with even Jim Jones and even Cameron, and still he couldn't develop any buzz. He was trying to do ads for Puffy's clothing line, a bunch of things trying to develop buzz for him, and it was slowly working. But since 50 Cent and G-Unit blew up in 2003, Dre had the genius idea and just said, hey, 50 Cent can write hooks very well. Maybe 50 can help Game develop his hook game, or just give him a bunch of hooks so that we can finally get the Game's debut album out to the world. So Dr. Dre met up with Jimmy Iovine, who was the CEO of Interscope at the time, then met up with also Jimmy Henchman, who is the Game's manager at the time, and had the brilliant idea to bring Game into G-Unit because G-Unit was also missing a West Coast member. This could be the brand new NWA of 2005 if they brought Game in. So they had Young Buck with Down South. They had 50 Banks and Yayo for the East Coast. Now they just needed a West Coast artist, and the Game was the perfect fit at the time. And the general public didn't know it at the time, but they did see the Game in various 50 Cent and G-Unit music videos. He even appeared in 50 Cent's In the Club video. He appeared in that Joe track, Wanna Ride With You, featuring G-Unit with Buck, Game, Banks. He appeared in various music videos, even in Lloyd Banks' On Fire. So the Game was around, just a lot of people didn't know who he was. So when the idea came for the Game to join G-Unit, 50 Cent was open for it, but he was also a little hesitant because Jimmy Henchman was the Game's manager, and Jimmy Henchman had a lot of ties with Kenneth Supreme, the Supreme team back in the 1980s. For those that don't know who Kenneth Supreme is, he was the leader of the Supreme team back in the 1980s. This was an organized crime group. They would sell drugs. They would do all kinds of shit in Queens. And of course, Queens is where 50 Cent was born and raised. So at one point, 50 Cent looked up to Kenneth Supreme, but then he switched and did not look up to him anymore. He went against him because Kenneth Supreme supported Ja Rule at that time, and then 50 went against that because he wasn't a fan of Ja Rule at all. So we're not going to get into that because that's the 50 Cent versus Ja Rule video. This is obviously 50 Cent versus Game, but we'll get into that in that video. But to backtrack, Jimmy Henchman made the offer. 50 Cent was a little hesitant because of the Supreme Team thing and Jimmy Henchman's ties to them, but ultimately 50 Cent agreed and decided to bring Game into G-Unit because they really did need a West Coast artist, and they were having that missing piece, and Game was it. So with the Game officially being in G-Unit, 50 Cent decided to get his buzz up, and 50 Cent did what 50 Cent does best, and that's get him involved in the G-Unit radio mixtapes. Get him on the mixtape circuit so his buzz can rise. So the first official mixtape that the Game appeared on was G-Unit Radio Part 3, Taking It to the Streets, which was released on August 13th, 2003. He appeared on the track So Hard featuring 50 Cent and Lloyd Banks.
It's so hard to say goodbye. Nigga, fat shout, nigga, belly Kubici, what up, baby?
Corner in Brooklyn, playing CeeLo, call me NY Game. Gucci, Chuck Taylor, black diamonds in my chain. G-unit, I write it on your vest or spray paint it on the wall like fuck y'all niggas.
The Game would then go on to be featured on various G-Unit Radio mixtapes, from G-Unit Radio Part 4, No Peace Talks, to G-Unit Radio Part 5, All Eyes on Us, to G-Unit Radio Part 6, Motion Picture Shit, to G-Unit Radio Part 7, King of New York, and then he would get his own mixtape, G-Unit Radio Part 8, The Fifth Element, which would officially introduce the Game to the world of G-Unit. Now that the Game has officially gotten his buzz up, he's officially a member of G-Unit, more people know him, they finally decided to work on the Game's debut album, The Documentary, and 50 Cent decided to take 2 tracks from his album, The Massacre, and give them to Game. He muted his own vocals and gave them to Game, and those tracks were How We Do and Hate It or Love It. Those tracks were originally supposed to be on The Massacre, and they were originally supposed to be actually singles on The Massacre. So had that gone different right now, The Massacre would have had those songs. But they ended up on Game's album. 50 then also ended up helping Game write a few hooks for tracks like Church for Thugs and West Side Story.
It took 2 months, but 50 got it done. Signed with G-Unit, had niggas like, huh?
So now that the Game's debut album is officially done, and now it's time to promote the Game, they finally decided to release the first track off the album as a single, and it was called West Side Story, featuring 50 Cent. The song was released in September 2004, and it didn't do really a lot to build his buzz, but it was a nice coming out single for his debut album. So then in November 2004, they decided to release How We Do, which also featured 50 Cent, and this was the single to actually chart on the charts and finally start to really gain some mainstream buzz for the Game.
What's up? This is how we do. We make a movement at the pool while we up in the club. This is how we do. Nobody do it like we do it, so show us some love. This is how we do.
So after the single How We Do dropped, this is where I believe the beef initially started, and this is where tensions between 50 Cent and the Game started to begin. At the time, 50 Cent was working on his own album, his second album, The Massacre, which was originally called St. Valentine's Day Massacre because he had planned to drop the album on February 14th, 2005. But clearly, as we look back now, the album dropped in March 2005. So it's clear that the album had to have gotten pushed back. And why did it get pushed back? Well, it's clear that the Game wanted to drop his album before 50 Cent. And I believe that 50 Cent got sort of distaste towards that, kind of got upset that he had to have to push his album back just for the Game to release his album. And I believe that's where like tension slowly started to rise. It wasn't a big deal at that moment, but that's when I believe that 50 Cent sort of started getting upset with the Game, Dr. Dre, and Jimmy Iovine. Now that How We Do dropped and Game was starting to gain mainstream buzz, the Game was also feeling himself way too much. He had his head up his ass thinking he was the hottest artist at the time. And for proof of that, on the track Put You on the Game, during the second verse, on the last line, he said, "I'm going 3 times platinum, dog. How do I stop? I'm hot." And he said this before his album even dropped. So it was clear that Game was feeling himself a lot. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you have a big head and you think you're the hottest artist before you even drop and do numbers, it's going to cause tension between 50 Cent, who is at that time the hottest artist at that moment. I mean, Massacre did 1.14 million copies the first week, so it was clear that Game was feeling himself too much. And even on the track We Ain't featuring Eminem, he said, "I'ma do shady numbers, I'm riding my own dick." So it's clear Game was really feeling himself.
I'ma do shady numbers, I'm riding my own dick.
This also ended up being the catalyst for the Game starting beefs with a lot of rappers, and even he had beef with a DJ. He started beef with Yuck Mouth, Joe Budden, and then even Jay-Z a week after his debut album dropped. And 50 Cent didn't want problems with Jay-Z at the time because Jay-Z could have easily destroyed the Game's career. Before it even launched, Game was going at Jay-Z, which was the wrong move. So 50 Cent himself said that he had to patch up, the Game dissing Jay-Z. He had to go call Jay-Z and say, "Listen, I'm sorry. He didn't mean that." And it already started problems more and more because Game was doing a bunch of reckless shit without even getting approval from 50 Cent. Game was also reckless and ended up dissing a DJ in North Carolina before his album even dropped. And the North Carolina DJ was saying, "We're not going to play his music at all." So 50 Cent once again had to make the phone call and say that Game is sorry, he didn't mean anything that he said, so that he could have a market in North Carolina so he wouldn't be banned from that area.
Never. There's never any, he called me actually, because he had said something about Jay-Z. He said he could suck his, and Memphis Bleak and Beanie Siegel. He did it overseas and it came back right away. And he had called me and I was like, "Yo, let me talk to him, because it was so early that Jay could have kind of put his lights out."
So with all those things happening, 50 Cent still let the Game be on G-Unit. 50 Cent didn't complain at all. He patched up all the problems that Game started. And despite Game thinking he's the shit, 50 still let it slide. But the Game decided to have a tour, and he went overseas to promote his album. And while he was touring over there promoting his album, he said, "Fuck Jay-Z." And that's where the main problems started happening. And like I said earlier, he said this a week after his album dropped. So he was overseas, the album dropped, and a week later he was saying "fuck Jay-Z" overseas. And then when Game came back, that's when the real problems happened. The Game and 50 Cent were not seeing eye to eye. The Game all of a sudden had switched his mentality. He ended up going in interviews, not even giving 50 Cent credit for helping him on his album. He would go interview after interview saying Dr. Dre helped him, Dr. Dre helped him. He wouldn't mention 50 Cent at all.
Now, who are some of the key people, man, that put you where you are right now?
Man, Dr. Dre, man.
Right.
That's it.
He wasn't wearing G-Unit clothing, and on top of that, 50 Cent took offense to the game, saying he has no problems with Jadakiss, Fat Joe, Cameron, or anybody in New York. And around that time, 50 Cent had dropped Piggy Bank, which was dissing Fat Joe and Jadakiss. And then MTV ended up interviewing the game and asking him about that song and what he thinks about it. And the game just simply said, hey, I have no problems with Jadakiss and Fat Joe. They're cool to me. Whatever problems 50 Cent has with them, that's between 50 Cent, Fat Joe, and Jadakiss, and not me.
I'm not getting into that.
You're not gonna get into that?
No. Jadakiss is a good friend of mine, and I've had a chance to meet and talk with Fat Joe on several occasions, and I think that they're perfectly good dudes.
You know, he went off and he said these things, and then I was busy patching that. I was putting band-aids over stab wounds in that situation, and then he came back, and his way of patching it up was, I don't have a problem with Jay-Z or Fat Joe or anybody. You know, like he said, I didn't have a problem with anybody instead of the people that he directly had those issues with.
Right.
And it was like, I'm busy patching this thing up that you just did, and you come back and you say you don't have a problem even with the people that I have issues with.
Right. So was that like strike 1 and 2, or was
it was interesting, like, cause he was saying, cause they were talking to him discussing what I had put out on Piggy Bank, and he was like, "Yo, I ain't got nothing to do with that," and this and that, and I'm like, I just gave you your first 3 singles.
Now, if we backtrack, and what I believe a lot of people missed is that right after Game got done touring overseas, he completely changed and said that he had no problems with the people that 50 Cent had problems with. And what I believe happened was that Jimmy Henchman, who had problems with 50 Cent behind the scenes and who at the time was Game's manager, got into the Game's ear and said that, hey, you can be bigger than 50 Cent if you go against 50 Cent, and this is how you do it. And for proof of this, if you guys watched the Beef 3 DVD, Jimmy Henchman, who was Game's manager at the time, himself said that the Game wasn't a G-Unit soldier, that he was meant to surpass 50 Cent or be at the same level of 50 Cent. So it's clear to me that Jimmy Henchman got into Game's ear and manipulated him, because Game was young at the time. Jimmy Henchman was a lot older, so it would have been a lot easier to manipulate Game into going against 50 Cent, because in Jimmy Henchman's eyes, that would boost sales and that would boost the Game's career, because if Game went against 50 Cent and won, he would sell a lot more records, he would be a lot bigger artist.
G-Unit is here, 50's here, and Game can be anywhere in between that and probably even bigger than that.
Now that Game said that he's cool with 50's enemies, they ended up having to shoot the video for Hate It or Love It, which was the 3rd single off of Game's debut album, The Documentary. And when they shot the video, it was rumored that 50 Cent had major tension with the Game and that he didn't even want to sit in the same front seat with the Game. If you look at the scene in Hate It or Love It, you'll see that 50 Cent is sitting in the back seat instead of the front seat with the Game. After the video was shot, the video ended up premiering on TRL on February 21st, 2005. And after the video premiered, that's when officially the public knew that the Game and 50 Cent weren't on good terms, because a week later, 50 Cent was on his promo run for The Massacre, because his album was getting ready to drop as well. So while he was doing promo run, he got asked a lot of questions about the Game and whether they're cool or not, because 50 had seen a lot of interviews of the Game not giving 50 props, and also saying that he's cool with Nas, he's cool with Jadakiss, he's cool with Fat Joe. All of the people that 50 Cent had problems with, Game was saying he's cool with. So the interviewers kept asking, are you and Game on good terms? 50 stopped by Power 105's The Ed Lever Show at the time, and he said that Game is no longer with G-Unit, and this is where the beef had officially started. And that's officially it for part 1 of 50 Cent versus the Game, who really won. Be sure to check out part 2, where we pick up right where we left off. The beef begins in part 2. We cover all the major points in the beef, and then we do our normal routine where we talk about who won the battle portion of the beef, which is the short-term portion of the beef, and then who won the war portion of the beef, which is the long-term portion of the beef. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed part 1 of 50 Cent versus The Game, Who Really Won. Leave a comment below, like, share, definitely subscribe. I do videos like this daily on who really won videos, to who changed the music industry, to daily hip-hop news. So definitely subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.